everybody, today we're going to make the Otterly Cozy Rice Warmer by Kimberbell. This is a project kit by Kimberbell. I'll link it below the video. You get enough fabric in this kit to make either a 5x7 or an 8x12 rice warmer. We'll be making the 8x12 size today. This is put together very similar to the polar bear rice warmer. I just put this guy together. There's a video on my channel for the polar bear rice warmer. I'll link that below. I cut for the 8x12. I have some fabric left over, but not quite enough to make another 5x7. So be aware the kit is designed to make one of the sizes, whichever one you choose to make. I've got all my fabrics prepped and labeled. You need to put fusible on the back of the feet fabric and the scarf fabric. In addition to the fusible backing, you're going to need light mesh cutaway and light tearaway stabilizers. I don't have the light tearaway. I have a generic medium weight tearaway. I'll be using that today. The Pebble Micro Velvet, that's used right here, the inner part of the body. When you lay that out to cut it, you want to lay it out so the nap brushes down. It does give you a reminder of that here. And there's also a note about which fabrics are directional, which is right here, the lining and the rice pack. But honestly, lining and rice pack being directional, they're inside. If you cut it the wrong way, it'll be fine. Nobody's going to see it. You'll also need some thread. They give the colors as glide threads. I've done a conversion to Floriani and Simthread. These are my thread numbers. I've got my threads here in my little butterfly rope bowl basket ready to go. The only thread I didn't have a good conversion for was hickory. Hickory's a very, very, very dark brown, and it's used for the nose and the eyes and some of the details. The darkest brown that I had blended right in with this fabric, so I'll be using black for that today. I use a glide color card to help with my thread conversion. You can look up the threads by color number and name. I'll put a link below where I purchased mine, but you can get yours through your local quilt shop and you can buy this online. You also might want some stuffing. There's part of the project that's optional with the stuffing. I did use that in my polar bear. I'm really glad I did. It gives it a little bit more softness to it. And if you're thinking of turning this project into more of a stuffy, before we attach the ears and the arms, you could even put a little bit of stuffing inside of that and it'll give it a little bit of dimension. I'm going to load light mesh cutaway into my 8x12 hoop. We're going to start on part 1, which is on page 5, stitching the ears, forepaws, and tail. Let's head over to the machine. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian. I have my files on USB. We're going to start with part A, the ears, forepaws, and tails. There's two sizes. There's 5x7 and 8x12. Make sure you select the correct hoop size. You can see that this one here we're going to start with, it does say 6x10. If you've got a 6x10 hoop, you can do this part in the smaller hoop. I don't. I'll be using an 8x12. We just need this one file. That's ready to go, and we're going to be starting with the color they call trout. This is the color I matched for that. This is a Simthread color. I'm going to put this on my machine. Got the color trout on my machine. The first thing we're stitching is the ears, forepaws, and tail placement and trimming lines. You stitch that directly onto the stabilizer. Grab a piece of your ears, forepaws, and tail fabric. We want to cover all of those placement lines. You can tape it if you like. I'm going to add a piece of paper tape to the top. We're going to stitch the tack down lines, and we're not going to trim. So just stitch out the tack down lines. Once that's stitched out, you want to switch to the color Latte. This is the color I'm going to be using. And we're going to stitch out the inner ear placement lines. They're going to stitch out there and there. You want to grab your inner ear fabric. This did not say to put fusible on it. You can if you don't want a bit of the darker showing through, but I actually like the way that looks. We want to cover those placement lines. I'll go ahead and add a small piece of tape. Once you've got your piece of fabric secured, you want to stitch the tack down lines. I'm going to trim everything away outside of the tack down lines, remove my tape, and then we'll stitch the decorative outline. You stitch that in the color Latte, so leave the same color thread on your machine. Next, you're going to switch to the color Hickory. I am using black for this. We're going to stitch the forepaws detail. The details stitched out, I do have a couple of jump threads. I'm going to cut those now before we go further. Once you've got your jump threads trimmed, you want to grab your other piece of ears, forepaws, and tail fabric, and we're going to place them right sides together. One thing I noticed is the fabric's not really directional, but it does have arches. I'm going to place them right sides together so my arches are going in the same direction. Up toward this part, up toward, we'll just call this the top, so everything is curving the same way. Make sure that's completely covered. I'm going to add a piece of tape to the top, and then it tells us to switch to the color trout, and we're going to stitch the ears, forepaws, and tail final outline. Everything is stitched out for this part of the project. Let's take this over to the table. You want to remove any tape if you use that. Get your project out of the hoop. I've trimmed away the extra stabilizer. I like to save the bigger pieces. I can use them for other things. We want to turn this over to the back side. There's a great picture here on page 6 of the instructions. This is step 14. They show the stitch lines that we see in red and blue. We want to trim on the lines that are shown in red. When you look at the back, the line we want to trim on is the outer line. And you're going to trim right along those outer lines. It shows us doing the trimming and then clipping to reduce bulk. I'm going to do mine a little bit differently. The first thing I'm going to do though is just separate these. I've got all my pieces. The next step, it shows trimming little notches into everything. Instead of trimming notches, pinking shears, they make notches as they trim. We are trimming right on the line. I'm going to trim right on the line with my pinking shears just like this, and it's going to make those notches for me as it trims. A little extra thread there. I'm going to be careful going around the corners. If you happen to cut into the stitching, put it on your sewing machine. Just fill in where you cut, or you can hand tack it down, because these lines on the inside are what are holding the piece together. Let's go around the ear in real time here, and then we'll have a look at it. You want to trim all of that, and then there's one more line right here. Trim right on that line, like that. We're going to trim all of these, and then you're going to turn them right side out. Here's one of the ears, so you're going to get that turned right side out. You can use your fingernail, or if you've got a nice point turning tool, I have a nice Clover Point Turner here. It's going to help make sure it turns really nicely. That looks pretty good. I'm going to do that for all of my pieces, and then I'm going to take these to the ironing board and give them a good press. We just did the ear. You know which lines to trim on the ear. We've got 2 forepaws. When you trim on the forepaw, the outside curve and the straight line there. And then when you trim on the tail, the outside curve and the straight line there. When you're doing the trimming for these pieces, this part right here on the ear, you can trim that with a straight scissor. Same thing with the tail. You can do this part with a straight scissor, and then with the forearms, this part here with a straight scissor, because that's the part that's going to attach to the project. Here's all my pieces turned and pressed. The one I had the most difficulty with was the tail. I always have trouble with turning small things, and the tip of this tail is kind of tight, so he's got a little bit of a blunt tail. These are all done. I'm actually going to give them one more press and set them underneath my clappers. This is a clapper if you've never seen one. It's a piece of wood. It's going to help keep everything flat. It helps absorb the heat and keep everything flat as it cools. I'm going to press those, set them under the clapper, and we're going to go on to part 2. Before we start part 2, make sure you've got your fusible backing on the wrong side of the feet fabric and the scarf fabric, and then we're going to fold each of the back fabric pieces in half lengthwise, wrong sides together. Let me go grab those. These are my back fabric pieces. We want to fold them wrong sides together like this. You want to end up with a nice long rectangle. If you fold them like this, they're going to end up too short to cover the back of the project. So fold them lengthwise like that, wrong sides together. and give them a press. Load your light mesh cutaway in an 8x12 hoop. Hand tighten, screwdriver tighten. Let's head over to the machine. This is going to be the fun part of the project. We're going to load the files to make the otter. Make sure you select the right size. Pick the one that looks like the otter. I'm doing the 8x12. Just one file to load. Bring that up. Set. Embroidery, and I'm ready to go. Going to put the color putty on our machine and stitch out the front placement line. Placement line is stitched. You want to grab your front fabric, right side up, cover the placement line. Pay attention to the curves if you're looking at that. I've got mine trimmed so the curves are going up toward the top. It really doesn't matter, not technically directional. I'm going to go ahead and tape that, and we're going to stitch a tack down line, and it's going to stitch some smaller lines that are going to help us position the ears, forepaws, and tail. Next, we're going to stitch out the inner body placement lines. The placement lines have stitched out. You want to grab the inner body fabric, which is the micro velveteen. I'm going to rub it. That's the wrong way. This fabric has a nap. Any direction is fine, really. It's a rice warmer. Don't worry about it. I just want it placed so when I rub it top to bottom, it lies flat. And if I run bottom to top, you can see the nap there. That's how I have mine cut. I'm going to lay it down that way. Make sure I cover those placement lines. And I'm going to take a minute and add some tape. I don't want this moving when I'm stitching the tack down. I added tape to the top and the bottom. We're going to stitch out the tack down, and then you're going to trim everything outside of the tack down lines. The next thing we're going to stitch out is the inner body satin outline. Something I forgot to show at the beginning, and I apologize. I usually remember to do that, is what type of needle am I using. Today on my machine, I have one of these Schmetz Super Non-Stick needles, the 8012. I meant to switch back to a regular 7511. I had this on for another project I did yesterday that had heavier stitching. I think you're going to be just fine with a regular embroidery needle, but that's what's on my machine today. The next thing we're going to stitch out is the inner body satin outlines. The satin outline is done. We're going to switch to the color Monarch. This is the color I'll be using. We're going to stitch out the scarf placement line. Grab your scarf fabric. That should have fusible on the back. You want to make sure you completely cover that placement line. I am going to tape mine down just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Once you've got your placement lines completely covered, you're going to stitch the tack down, and then we'll trim everything outside the tack down line. I've got this all trimmed. The red color I picked matches this fabric almost exactly. This was very difficult to see. In fact, I'm inside the stitch line on this top curve. It'll be fine because the satin outline is going to go around the whole thing. If I made one of these again, I think I might pick a thread that's slightly contrasted with the bandana so I could see it and make the trimming easier, because we're going to stitch over it anyway with a satin stitch. Next, we're going to stitch out the scarf satin outline. Once the satin outline has stitched out, switch to the color you're using for trout. We're going to stitch the placement line for the feet. Grab your feet fabric. I actually cut another piece. The first piece I had for the feet fabric had the print going this way, so I recut it to match the print kind of arcing at the top. Probably not going to be very noticeable at the end because there's going to be little foot pads in the center, but I wanted everything to match. I'm going to add my tape at the top and add one more piece at the bottom. And then we're going to stitch the tack down line and trim everything outside the tack down line. Once you've given your otter a pedicure, you can stitch out the satin outline. Next, switch to the color Latte, and we're going to stitch out the placement line for the foot pads. Grab your foot pad fabric. You want to cover the placement lines. I'm going to use a piece of tape, hold it in place. Then we're going to stitch the tack down, trim, and then stitch the decorative outline. Same steps we've been doing. I'll go ahead and run all of that together. Next, switch to the color Hickory. I'm working with black for that. We're going to stitch out the face details. Check your bobbin. If your bobbin's right about to run out, now's a good time to change it. We're stitching out the eyes, the nose, and the whiskers. It would kind of be a bummer for the bobbin to run out in the middle of that. Once the facial details have stitched out, we need to get our hoop off our machine, go over to the table. We're at the table, you have your otter and your hoop, all the otter parts. The first thing we're going to do is attach the ears. One thing I thought I would look at is we've got the ear here, and then I took the other ear and I put a little polyfill on the inside. I wanted to see what this would look like. It gives it a little bit of puff, a little bit of definition, and this one is more flat. So you can stuff it and kind of set it down and visualize how it's going to look. If you want your piece to have more of a round, full, stuffed animal feel, put a little bit of that polyfill in. I think I'm going to leave it out. I think I'm going to go ahead and put these on flat, but there will be another part of the process where we will add a little bit of polyfill, like when we made the polar bear rice warmer, and I'll use it there. We're going to start with the ears. When the project is done, it'll look like that. So when you're taping your ears down, right sides together, kind of like you're covering his little eyes, and you want the edge of your ears to line up with the line right here. This is nice. It's stitched out a little box. You line it up and set it inside the little box. I'm going to use 2 pieces of tape. It only shows 1 piece in the picture, but I just made the polar bear rice warmer and we used 2 pieces and it worked out really well. 1 piece there and then another piece on the inside. We're going to be taping down all of the little pieces and putting another piece of fabric down, and it's going to stitch around. So this tape shouldn't get caught. Here's my second ear, right side down. I'm going to place it inside the box. Very well done. This is nice. It fits just inside that box. There's no measuring or guessing where that needs to go. Got 1 piece of tape there, and I'm going to put another piece of tape here. The little ears are placed. We're going to move to the arms. When you place them, the paw detail faces down. I'm going to place 1 here, line it up inside that box. Here's my piece of tape. I'm going to tape it here. Now it does show only taping this part. I'm going to go ahead and tape it in 2 places. It's going to make it a little flatter, a little more secure, and I'm just more comfortable with that. I'm going to take the next arm, same thing, line it up just inside that box, grab my long piece of tape, tape it right here, and my shorter piece of tape, and tape down the paw. I'm actually going to tape this side of the paw as well. Grab a couple more pieces of tape. We want to make sure this is as flat as we can get it. The next thing we want to tape down is our tail. The picture has the tail like this. My tail doesn't actually fill that little box, which is fine. I'm just going to center it. I'm going to tape right here at the bottom, and if it stitches over the tape, it's not a big deal. You can pick it out. Make sure that's secure. Now you need to fold this part of the tail out of the way. See the line right here? So if this goes around and tacks down, you'd catch the tail. Go ahead and fold the tail up and out of the way, tape that down, and I'm going to actually place 1 more piece of tape. I just want to make sure it's nice and secure, taped into place. Everything is taped. Looks like he had a rough night out in the ocean, doesn't it? Like he's covered in band-aids. You want to get your pieces of back fabric. We're going to lay these across the project. Start with 1 piece, and we're going to overlap them 1 to 2 inches in the center. If your hoop has a little center notch here, that's helpful because you can measure sort of from the notch over about 1 inch, and that way you know you've got that inch overlap. I want to make sure that I'm covering completely. I'm going to line up my raw edges here. That way I know I've got enough overlap in the center. 1 that way, 1 this way. It doesn't matter which side goes first. Make sure it's lined up. That looks good. I'm going to double check the top. Here's my line. I've covered that line. I'm going to double check the bottom. I've covered that line. Now we want to tape this. We want to tape across that center seam and then all the way across the top and the bottom. This is the same procedure that I used for the polar bear rice warmer, and I'll be stitching this final outline the same way. I do something a little bit different. I'll show you how I do that on my machine. Once everything is taped down, we can head back over to the machine. You want to switch to the color trout, and we're going to stitch the back tack down and reinforcement lines. I've got the correct color thread on my machine. One thing I did with the polar bear rice warmer, and I'm going to do with this, is I can kind of feel where the bumps are. You can also see, so as this is going around, I keep my hand right here on the start and stop key, and I slow it down as it's getting towards those bumps. I don't want my foot to get caught. You can do that if you like. If not, you don't have to. But when you watch this video, you'll see my hand here in the picture. And I'm just starting and stopping to make sure it doesn't jam up as it goes over the thicker parts of the project. The next step is to remove all the visible tape. So everything you've got right here that you can see, the center seam, the top and bottom, get that tape off. I'm over at the table. I picked off as much tape as I could. Grab your lining fabric. It needs to go right side down. You want to make sure you completely cover that line that you just stitched out, and then we're going to tape that into place. Grab some tape. I'm ready to take this back to my machine. We're going to stitch out the last part, which is the lining tack down. It's going to go all the way around, and then I think it goes back again. It will leave an opening for turning. Keep an eye on your project because you're still running over all of that bulk. You don't want anything to get caught if you happen to look away. We're ready to go back to our table, and we're going to trim and flip our project. Remove all the tape, and then you want to get your project out of the hoop. And as you're removing your tape, there's some tape that I can see. Any tape that I can get my hands on and remove before I take this out of the hoop, I'm going to do that. Just like before, I'm going to cut away the excess stabilizer, get that out of the way. The instructions tell us to trim 1/4 inch outside the line and then to clip curves. I'm going to use the pinking shears again. One thing that I'm going to do a little bit differently, it worked really well for the polar bear rice warmer. For this opening right there, I'm going to give myself extra fabric because I don't hand stitch things closed. So this part right here, I'm just going to use my scissors. I'm going a lot more than 1/4 inch away. The reason I do that is when we go to flip this and fold it, and I go to sew this on my sewing machine, I have enough fabric to get it folded under. So for the rest of this, I'm going to grab my pinking shears, I'm going to get in close to that stitch line and go all the way around. Now, you've got ears up here, little arms, and a tail. It might be a little bit thick. Yep, I can feel it right there. There's the ear. You may have to get both your hands to get through that part. If you're not able to squeeze the scissors like that, you can use a straight rotary cutter if that's easier. The pinking shears just help because it gives you that built-in notch. I'm going to go all the way around the otter. Here's what that looks like, as close as I could get, comfortably with my pinking shears. And I have the extra fabric here that's going to help me when we go to close this on the sewing machine. We want to turn this right side out through the opening in the lining. You take your time. There's a lot of bulk with the otter. Remember, it's got feet, it's got the bandana, the ears, and the arms. Flip it right side out. This is the step where you use your polyfill, fiberfill, whatever you want to call it. I did this with the polar bear rice warmer. I'm really glad I did this. You're not going to stuff it full. You're just going to add a little bit right here between the back of the otter and the lining. It just gives it a little bit of extra softness. So take just a little bit at a time. You don't need very much. You're going to slide that in and try and get it spread evenly. My little polar bear ended up with what I call junk in the trunk because I had more polyfill down there than up on top. So I'm going to try and do a little bit better with the sea otter here. Make sure it's a little more evenly distributed. And you can just feel just that little bit. It gives it a little bit of softness. I highly recommend using the stuffing. Got the stuffing in here. You can just sort of run your hands along it. Make sure it feels nice and even. Here's why I left the extra flap there. We need to sew this closed on our sewing machine. All these pieces need to fold into the center, and this piece needs to fold into the center. And then I use this line right here, the straight stitch line, as my guide where I want everything to meet up. So if you only have 1/4 inch of fabric, which I've done before, it's really difficult to get a good, nice, tight closure on it. It's so much easier if you've got a little bit of extra fabric to work with. You can pin it, you can clip it, you can do neither, and then you want to take it to your sewing machine, put a straight stitch on it as close to the edge as you can, or you can hand stitch it closed. I'll go do that and bring it back and show you what it looks like. I've got that stitched closed. You can see my stitching right here, not the best. It's a stitch length of 2 on my Juki straight stitch machine. The goal is just to get this closed. Now comes the fun part. We're going to flip this guy right side out. You've got this nice big opening here, and I can see I've got some tape I'm going to remove. Really does look like he's recovering from some kind of injury, doesn't it? Everything is taped down. Let's go ahead and get our tape off. A quick side note, this is the Kimberbell paper tape. It really, really sticks to this micro velveteen. I wish I knew that. I think some of this tape I'm probably going to have to wash out. So if you can avoid taping on this micro velveteen, I would recommend it. I think I've got as much of the tape off as I can, making sure I've got him turned right side out. Here he is. I can actually still see a little tiny bit of tape right there. I just need to wash that off, but since I'm filming, I'm not going to stop and make the whole otter wet. We're going to set him aside for now. He can go float away and relax, and we're going to work on the rice warming pouch. This part of the project differs from the Polar Bear rice warmer. It says to use a light tearaway stabilizer. All I have is this tearaway medium. It's going to be fine because we're going to tear it away. I'm going to load this into my hoop, hand tighten, screwdriver tighten, and head over to the machine. Let's load the last part of our project. We're going to stitch up the rice pack. It's the one that looks like an egg. Bring that up, set embroidery. I'm ready to go. I'm going to use the color that's on my machine. I believe it's Trout. If you're wondering why they're using tearaway on this one and then on the Polar Bear rice warmer use the light mesh cutaway. Technically, if you're going to create something that's going to be used in the microwave, you want no polyester. If you're making microwavable bowl cozies, no polyester. You want 100% cotton batting, cotton fabric, and cotton thread. Since we're making this on our embroidery machine, I do have polyester thread. I haven't had a problem with the Polar Bear rice warmer. When you go to use this product and when you're heating it up, you want to heat it up in increments. Watch your microwave. Make sure there's no problems, nothing bursts into flames, and then you'll know if you're good. That's a simple explanation. Cotton only for things used in the microwave, but we do have polyester thread. We're going to stitch out the rice pack placement line. If you want, switch to a 30 weight cotton thread. I'm not sure how that would hold up with the speed of the embroidery machine. You might have to slow your machine down so the thread doesn't shred and break. I'm going to go ahead and go with the thread on my machine. You have 2 pieces of fabric for your rice pack. Grab one, make sure you cover the line, and place this right side up. I'm double checking, making sure the line's covered. Grab the next piece, right side down, place it right on top of the other one. You know you're covering that line. You can add tape. I've got lots of tape. I've saved all my tape from this project, and I'm working on a table, and I have tape hanging off everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and tape that down, and then we're going to stitch the tack down. The tack down is going to stitch just like before and go around and go back and leave an opening for flipping. That's it for the embroidery machine for this one. Let's take this over to our table. Back over at the table, you want to remove your tape and then get this out of your hoop. I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to cut away the extra stabilizer, cut and leave extra room right there to turn, and then take my pinking shears and trim around. Here's how that looks trimmed. You can see I left that little bit extra there. We want to go ahead and remove this tearaway stabilizer. I've got all the stabilizer removed. I want to flip this right side out, and then you can use your point turning tool. Remember, this doesn't have to look perfect. You're going to go fill it with rice, but you can use your tool to help make sure you get this as poked out as possible. And then you're going to want to go fill it with rice. Don't overstuff it. Remember, you've got to either hand stitch it closed or slide this under the presser foot. Let me show you the polar bear one. Here's the inside of the polar bear rice warmer. See, it's not completely stuffed full. It moves a little bit, which is what you want, because you're going to heat this up, and then if you're putting it like on your arm, if your arm is sore, you want it to be able to lay over and mold, lay around your neck, so you don't have to completely stuff it. It should have some movement to it. I've got this stuffed and sewn closed. Kind of gives you an idea about how much I filled it. When you want to use this, this is the part that goes in the microwave. I highly recommend starting with small increments, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Keep an eye on it. Make sure you don't have any trouble with it in your microwave. You're going to open the back of the otter, skinny part up by the head, larger part on the bottom. Just match the shape. Let me go ahead and get that inside. And I just kind of wiggle it. If you're making it into a stuffed animal, you could fill this with polyfill, and then you could put some Velcro right here, a nice sticky strip of Velcro. They make those kind that peel and then just go down and stick, and you could Velcro it closed. That would give you the option to open it up if it needed to be washed and cleaned and restuffed at some point. So get that arranged how you like it. I'm going to grab my lint roller and give him a lint roll. Here he is. He came out great. Looks like he's floating on a pink ocean, doesn't he? Very cute. I will wash this little bit of sticky off. Very nice. What a fun project. Let's put him next to the polar bear. Here's our otter and our polar bear. The polar bear came from the Feeling Festive Bella box, which was recently on a deal of the week, so I picked one up. I'll check to see if this is available digitally. If it is, I'll link it below. If not, request it from Kimberbell. Send them a customer service email. You can use the contact us on their website. Let them know you want to make the polar bear rice warmer. Thank you so much for joining me making the Otterly Cozy Rice Warmer. Let me know if you stitched along with me. Leave me a comment. Let me know if you make the small one, the 5x7, or the larger one in the 8x12 hoop. Remember, try and keep the paper tape off of that micro velvet. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. I'll be bringing you lots more Kimberbell, embroidery, rope crafts, whatever I can find time to record and whatever people like to see. The next project I'm working on is the Let It Snow pillow. I do have a video on my channel showing my fabric selection. I'll link that below if you'd like to watch that. And there's going to be a project coming from the Happy Place Embroidery Projects design. That'll be posted soon. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your otter, and I'll see you next time.